So FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Now these come from foods, which is why things like garlic, onion, certain fibers will trigger a fermenting in the small intestine, which can create bloating, constipation, sometimes diarrhea. And it can be broken down into a number of more detailed layers or a deeper layer where if you get this fermentation happening and you generate hydrogen gas from hydrogen producers during the fermentation, you're going to stimulate diarrhea, for example. Now, if there are more methane producers in the small intestine that are metabolizing these oligosaccharides or mono and disaccharides, sugars, in other words, you're going to get constipation. Now, if you have hydrogen sulfide producers, you're going to get a combination of both. Likewise, you're going to have a number of these other issues, not only constipation, but you'll have the bloating, cramping, potential headaches, other metabolites can be produced, which can create more systemic problems, joint aches, and so on. So this is a serious condition that we want to address in the most natural way, and the microbiome is the center of it. Clearly, as I've described it, you can see where the microbes are the key feature of what we need to bring back into a balance or eubiosis. So one of the ways in which I wanted to present this is I'm going to show you a protocol that's used by a number of different clinicians, highly respectable clinicians in dealing with and or trying to address this SIBO issue. And in fact, because of associated conditions like IBS and IBD, there's some benefits in just the knowledge of understanding this as clinicians. And if you're a patient, then of course, working with a clinician in this respect. So let me quickly show you what this looks like. So here we go. So this is the protocol. And what you can see is we have a protocol where we define SIBO, and SIBO is defined as a overcolonization. We then have, of course, some underlying causes, and those are right here, where we talk about altered microbiome, the different forms of SIBO, which is the H2 or methane or H2S producers. It impairs our mobility, which is why we have the altered bowel functions. We have food sensitivities. Now, clearly, SIBO and the fermentation, these are bidirectional issues. If we're fermenting things too quickly in the small intestine, we're going to generate these byproducts that are really disastrous in the upper GI. So we're trying to reverse this issue. We have, then, of course, bloating, cramping, and inflammation is one of them. So let's go through maybe some of the more interventions that we want to be very much familiar with. So I have phases here: phase, goal, treatment, and duration. So treatment, to start this phase, we want to deal with something that's restrictive like a FODMAP diet. It is in fact recommended that we identify these food sensitivities, we remove them from the diet, and then we start to modify our microbiome using things like herbal or other antimicrobials. We've reduced the FODMAP so we can start reintroducing simpler foods, and this should be done 4 to 6 weeks. We want to reduce our bacterial feeding process in the small intestine, as well as the herbal and or other antimicrobials. Once we start reintroducing gradually different FODMAP foods, we can start introducing more complicated fibers, which will not ferment in the small intestine, even if we have some level of organisms still there. So we're not only actively removing them, we're also starving them out over time. But we want to start reintroducing these food sensitivities because we want to get back to a healthy state, not having to survive on a restricted diet state. And then long term, we can keep introducing whole foods. We might want to add in the polyphenols, the resistant starch, the probiotics, the prebiotics, fermented foods, of course, but we do it slowly and we do it carefully so as to not disrupt some of these processes. And of course, you don't want to have a really unhealthy reaction to any of these things. And then as we look into more of the herbal pieces down here, this is a list of what FODMAP foods contain that we want to avoid first off. As we introduce them, we want to introduce mixed complex fibers, greens, nuts, berries, and so on, because these are going to only ferment in the colon, not in the small intestine. Herbal microbials, they come in a number of varieties and choices. I've listed some here. And then ferments without sugar. Sugar is one of the FODMAP triggers, so we reduce our sugar intake. And then, of course, our microbiome support. Following these things, working with a clinician or as a clinician, these kinds of approaches can be absolutely amazing. And we want to get back to what we consider a vital state, not a limited state. we reduce these organisms in the small intestine. And at the same time, we want to avoid fungal issues, which is called SIBO. Different topic, different time, but it's something just to be mindful of.